Well, I've got Dr. Michael Sytsma back with me again. If you're remember with the Passionately Marriage podcast, he was on with Shanti Feldhahn with Secrets of Sex and Marriage is the book that they collaborated together with. And offhandedly, Michael, I'm assuming you remember this, but offhandedly after we finished the recording, you just made a comment of, hey, I would love to talk Schnarch and some of the higher level, because that's what the last chapter of the book is.
Right.
And so that wet my whistle enough to say, all right, you're getting back on here as quick as possible. And so we're going to do kind of a look at the higher level processes, and there's something deeper going on and wherever that may go. So Michael, it's so good to see you again.
Thanks. It's an honor. And, this kind of topic is you rarely get to talk about those deeper level kind of thinking. So I appreciate the invite. I have no idea
Absolutely.
where we'll go with this, but this could be
I,
fun.
I don't either. And the nice thing is, as I'm recording this from my RV, I'm not driving it. So if we crash, it's not like a literal crash. Um, I love the concept of what you've created and the work that you do. Of ultimately, we're trying to help couples just feel better connected, get in more congruence with their values, their structure, their way of living. But there's also something deeper going on, and I'm curious
Right.
how do you look at that? Let's start there.
Um, I think a number of things come together for me. I'm going to give a little background, and then that may make sense and why. But my training and my own personal identity as a Wesleyan pastor, and that comes out of a holiness type of a background that emphasizes the discipleship of the believer. It had some real negatives in getting into some of the legalism, but
Mm-hmm.
the positives are the emphasis on your own personal growth and development and your own relationship with God and your own holiness. And then I ran across, actually, it was in some pastoral work that I was getting some training in, and I ran across David Schnarch, and I listened to him talk through his approach. And this would have been in um, probably the early mid 90s. And I sat there wading through his language and, some of the graphic nature of his stories. As a pastor, that was a little tough, but realizing there's a concept here that has been captured that I think I haven't heard before that seems to line right up with discipleship. And
Mm-hmm.
so today I do exactly what you're saying. I work on helping couples to develop intimacy and to grow. But the peek behind the curtain, to flashback to Wizard of Oz here, the peek behind the curtain is I'm using that, and I'm using sex as an object lesson, as the training ground, as, to use his language, the crucible, to bring
Mm-hmm.
forth those personal growth moments. So what I look forward to is the time that this happened recently. A husband came in and he sat down and he looked up at me and he said, "I quit." And I said, "Okay, help me to understand what you mean." He said, "I quit." He said, "I hear what you're inviting me to do as a husband. I get that. I'm all in. I cannot do it. I have tried. I'm not capable of being that kind of a person. I quit."
Okay.
And he expected me, of course, to rally the troops and to be hopeful. And I looked at him and I says, "Finally, I'm glad." And he's like, "You don't think I should be married?" "Oh, no, no, no. I think you need to stay married, but that you're quitting of your own power, that you're saying I'm not capable of this, that you're going through a surrender moment. That this is
Mm-hmm.
what real growth is about. And you're going to have to decide, do I continue to live in a marriage that I demand my way all the time? Or do you surrender it and figure out a marriage where we are fighting for one another, where we're caring
Mm-hmm.
for one another, and and that is a radical internal shift. That's a moment of personal discipleship where we see somebody come to the point of them having to realize, I'm putting pressure on you to be who I want you to be. The real problem here is me.
Yeah.
Am I going to be a discipled individual, or am I going to continue to keep putting pressure on and fighting for what I want? And to me, that's the core of it. Am I going to follow my language internally? Is, am I going to follow Christ in this moment? Am I going to live the way he would have me to live? Or am I going to follow what I want? Which is
Hmm.
probably good, but my way about it is definitely not working. So I love this because it's about the individual growth. And
Yeah.
then, that took me into reading Friedman and Bowen, and far beyond that, to learn about the personal, my language again, the personal discipleship that
Yeah.
comes
And
from these systemic relationships.
yeah. And I use the same terminology. I just use it as personal responsibility,
Hmm.
agency, some of those concepts that
Right.
we do too much as a disservice in a lot of ways of trying to keep it a collaboration when one partner's not collaborating or both
Right.
aren't collaborating. And if that's the case, it's a recipe for disaster if I teach you how to um, just talk to each other or be assertive or whatever when we're still demanding our way deep down.
Right. That process doesn't work. And in Secrets of Sex and Marriage, there are three concepts that I worked on developing that uh, were rather controversial. That took a lot of editing. That took our external editors really pushing back on. And one of those was when I was pointing out that people tend to set themselves up as being a victim unintentionally.
Right, right.
That I cannot be okay if you aren't different, and that never works. How can we
Hmm.
not resent the other? If I need you to be different than who you are, if I need you to treat me differently for me to be okay, and I just put myself into a one down victim powerless mentality, and the whole system's going to crash or limp along very unhealthfully.
So I want to ask a question here because I think your pastorate background. I mean, I came from the ministry too. I started 6 years in youth and family ministry, and then
Uh-huh.
transitioned into this. And um, you made the comment of, I think people will take the victim mentality sometimes unintentionally, right? I think I
Well, they
might have
set
more of a
themselves up that
cynical
way.
view. Well, I think I might have more of a cynical view and add more of a no, no, it's intentional.
You think that we like that powerless position.
I think that there's a payoff that's potentially from it, so therefore I choose it.
Yes, that I could agree with.
Okay.
Um, but they sit, as I'm sure it is for you, they sit in my office and they blame their spouse for
Mm-hmm.
the condition that they're in. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
then get out of it. But they have to know they don't have
Right.
to change for you to be different. Now the cost may be way too high. There,
Absolutely.
there's a whole lot that goes into it. But chapter 9 in Secrets of Sex and Marriage, we talk about grace, we talk about grieving, we talk about acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And I pull some of this from Jacobson to talk shop. I pull this from Jacobson and Christensen's integrated
Mm-hmm.
marital model of acceptance and change, is the book that they wrote for couple, or that's the manual. Reconcilable Differences is the book they wrote for couples. And the whole point of it is, if I want to see change in my marriage, I have to accept what is.
Yeah.
That I have to accept that you are who you are before we can begin. And there's a surrender process that allows for profound
Mm.
change.
Oh, totally. Yeah. When I
Mhm.
recognize, I mean, that's one of my favorite phrases from Schnarch is, in marriage, I have to recognize there's an emotional terrorist, and then
Yes.
there's also my spouse to deal with too.
Right.
And I mean, it's such a great capturing of what's really going on
Uh-huh.
because absolutely I do that because I even use, like you're talking about, the discipleship model. I put that in the context of character and wisdom development, right? That
Hmm.
it's me. I'm in a relationship that will demand of me, if I want more out of it, it demands of me my character
Right.
refining.
Right. That I have to surrender things that I'm not sure I'm willing to surrender
Hmm.
or not.
Or face
Um,
the things I don't know if I want to face in me, and
right.
see the things that I'm blind to. And I mean, that's the thread I've been on lately in my personal life is I think I'm blind to some things. Pam, help point these suckers out to me. What am I missing in me? Because this keeps happening, so it's got to be something in me.
So, a, a little bit of reveal here. I'm sitting in a therapist meeting yesterday, and all of my therapists that work for me were talking about an issue that we're trying to make a decision on. And one of the therapists said, "Well, those days that you're kind of grumpy." And internally, I'm aware I'm horribly offended. I am never grumpy. I'm such an even keeled, stable person. And, and what I said to her is, my wife would love you right now.
Hmm.
To point out that I'm not as stable and even keeled as I like to think that I am, that everybody else
Hmm.
around me knows there are days that I'm just grumpy.
Hmm.
And, those, when we can receive that from our spouse, that's really rich. The moment I look
Yes.
at her and say, "You cannot see me as grumpy. You have to view me differently," or "I'm grumpy because of you," I'm
Hmm.
back into that victim kind of a role that
Right.
doesn't work. Hmm.
Right. So pick that up because you said there were three. So there's the victim. I think I know where you're going, but what are the other two of the stances we can take?
Um, Trying to remember where I was at the time.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
interrupted you fully. I mean, I'm
the-
assuming we're talking about the one down versus now we can go one up, and there's a lot of
yeah,
framework that we can use.
I can try to override who you are. I can demand from you, and I can push, and I can try to gain power over this to make it
Hmm.
my way, or I can do some surrender and some grief work.
Right.
You may never be who I want you to be. In my area of specialty in working with sexual intimacy, that means my husband may never be the kind of person who treats me sexually the way I would like to be treated. I have so many wives that come in here and talk about how they wish their husband was this kind of a lover.
Right.
And many times I look at him and say, "Yeah, you picked wrong." he's, he's just he's no my one of my iconic examples of that is a wife who came up and said, "I just have this fantasy of my husband coming in and picking me up, carrying me upstairs, throwing me on the bed, tearing my clothes off, and just ravaging my body." She said,
Hmm.
that would just, and she said, "I married this pastor student who is so gentle and so soft, so empathic, so caring. The thought of treating me that way is so offensive to him
Hmm.
that he couldn't be consistent with him. He is such a tender, caring lover. And there are times I don't want him to be that way."
Yep.
And she said, "I have to accept that my husband is more Christ to me than sometimes I want him to be. And I'm not always okay with that." And
Yeah.
I think that's the moment right there where she's
Yep.
realizing who she's demanding. Now, she could continue to scream and yell and rant and rave to try to make him and demean him and make him be, and it's never going to work.
Right.
Or what happens when they choose radical transparency? And she says, "This is part of my heart's desire, but I know it's inconsistent with you." And he says, "I could try to be that, but it's never going to feel right because it never comes from an authentic part of me.
Hmm.
And I have to accept that I'm never going to touch a fantasy in you. I'm
Hmm.
just not, that I would love
Hmm.
to be able to touch in you." And when the two of them get radically transparent and accept who I'm not and who you're not, and who we will never be, now we have the opportunity to cast a vision for who we can be together that is
Right.
really beautiful and rich. But
Yeah. Because
that requires that differentiation.
that's that simultaneous. We're both going to recognize the deficits and the strengths, and
Exactly.
it's not either intent of one or intentional of the other. It's I'm not. I mean, obviously, we can weaponize those things, and that's what we do when they stay covert, right? Because that's the
Right.
thing. The thing I've loved most about the whole differentiation model from Schnarch and why it resonated so quickly with me and was biblical in my mindset
Mhm.
too when I first was
Right.
introduced, like, yes, this is our relationship with Christ and God too, of
Right.
this is a I have to be my own person as I am shaped into him. It's an evolving,
Hmm.
right? It's
Right.
not just a obeying, right? It's a
Hmm.
whole lot more that's deeper. That the thing I loved about the whole framework is he never talked about this like a it would solve things. A lot of the theories I would come across always had that undercurrent of here's your solution to make that problem go away. When it's like,
Right.
no, you will not make it go away. And if you want to leave that relationship and try another one, you just brought yourself to another set of problems. So
Right.
let's just talk about what really is. And that's so freeing to me.
But that's a grieving process that clients really struggle with, that I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
That, I'm a professor in 5 different schools right now, teaching graduate courses, and I love those moments where a student says, "But how do you, as a therapist, fix this problem?" And I sat back and I go, "You don't.
Mm-hmm.
The task is not making this better by changing what they're asking for. We make this better by helping them to accept that it's not going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
That grief is what's going to allow them to find something that's rich and good. And if
Right.
you join their narrative that this has to be the way I want it to be in order for it to be rich and good, you've set them up for failure the rest of their life.
Right.
And you've bought into believing that you need to be the hero who solves their marriage issue. And I'm sorry, you're not that good.
Right. And
So,
incidentally, neither are they.
right. And, many times they'll say, God has the ability to fix this, and he doesn't. Why are you insisting on being the person to fix it? There's
Mm-hmm.
something broken in your view of it. But we take that same approach with our spouses. You have to be different, and I need to fix you, or you need to go get fixed.
Right.
Versus, wow, what's going on here? The couple last night, and she says, I just feel so unsafe with you. And of course, his first response is to demand that she feel safe with him and to
Mm-hmm.
tell her all the reasons she should feel safe with him. And I point out, this is why she doesn't feel safe. What if you shifted into, oh, I would never want my wife to feel unsafe with me. Something is going wrong here.
Okay.
And what if you got curious? How do you experience me as being unsafe? And you leaned in and you really heard her heart. And maybe she
Mm-hmm.
totally misunderstands you. I think she largely does. I think this is a good guy. But maybe she totally understands you, but she has got that message. And look at her and
Mm-hmm.
say, well, this is because of your daddy. That's not safe. That didn't help. That reinforces her internal belief versus doing to use the language, the differentiation work of how do I be different in this moment? How
Mm-hmm.
do I show her a different script? Because demanding and ridiculing and
Right.
invalidating, that is making, that is unsafety.
Right. And
Versus,
keep going. Sorry.
just to say, versus me stepping back, taking personal ownership. I can change this script. I can help her to feel safe in this moment. And that counters what she's saying. She will feel that versus me telling her to.
Right, right. And that
Mhm.
also, and this is the thing I love about the crucible, is by doing that, you in essence also push it on her to have to face what is it within her
Right,
she needs to deal with too, because it's going on
right.
concurrently. Because I've had at a getaway that we do for those that listen every year, there was a question that came up one year of my husband likes this sort of avenue for help. I like this sort of avenue for help. How do we come to an understanding so that we both feel safe together in dealing with these
Uh-huh.
issues? And I kind of paused for a moment to make sure because I wanted to get this across very cleanly and succinctly, because I can be abrupt and shock value sometimes. So
Uh-huh.
I need to,
Perturb the
catch that.
system.
Right. And so I'm sitting there thinking it through and I was like, okay, so first off, if one of your primary goals in your life, as you speak to me as a woman right now, is safety, marriage is a horrible choice. So,
Right.
because you expose yourself to all kinds of disappointment, for hurts, frustrations,
right.
and weaknesses of you, not even to mention your partner. So if you can kind of, and that settles people, because that's the one thing you kind of keep alluding to, and I would assume you see the same thing, that when you can help a person, and when we can get a better picture of what's going on and where I am, I settle down.
And, people, it's a tough balance. People often think that I need to be in a safe environment. My spouse needs to be safe. And there's an aspect
Mm-hmm.
of that,
Sure,
which is true. There are some people
sure,
that just are not safe. There are some environments that are not safe.
absolutely.
But people fail to remember or to realize that safety comes first from within. I
Mm-hmm.
use the example, and this is an old example, pre-COVID, but when H1N1 came to the United States, swine flu, and H1N1 as a flu killed little kids. So this was a terrifying disease to come in. At the time, my wife was working as a school nurse where our kids were going to elementary school. And the CDC brought in all of the elementary school nurses and said, "You are our front line. You will know when this disease hits the United States before anybody else because it's going to show up in your clinics." So they trained the nurses in how to spot it, and they trained them in what to do, all the stuff that in a post-COVID world we know to do: mask them, and 6 foot apart, and sterilize the environment around them, um, and then they set them loose. And it was a few months later that my wife comes home and says, "Up, it's in my school." I said, "It is." She said, "Yeah, this kindergarten girl today," she said, I am 95% sure once they test her that it's going to be H1N1. So what'd you do? She says, "Well, she's a kindergartner and she misses her mommy, and now she's sick and she really misses her mommy and she's crying. And so I'm holding her in my lap and I'm wiping her runny nose. And so here's my wife holding this disease-ridden child and potentially bringing this disease home." But what she knew is not only had she gone through the training, she'd been one of the volunteers to check the vaccine. So they would inject the vaccine. They'd wait a couple of weeks. They'd check the titers in her blood. They'd give more of the vaccine. They knew the vaccine worked. They were trying to figure out how much to give. But the upshot of it was, by the end of the study, they knew that all of these volunteers were vaccinated. So she could sit there and hold this viral ridden child and not worry about bringing the disease home. And I like to ask people, was the disease any less deadly in her lap? The disease was no less deadly. What
Mm-hmm.
was the difference? Well, the difference was her immunity. And so the challenge to couples is, you feel unsafe in this marriage, you feel unsafe with your spouse. Rather than demand that they be different, what does it take to change your immunity? What does it take to grow something up in you to where
Mm-hmm.
when your wife is moody, you go, she's kind of moody. I love her. This is not who she wants to be. And I'm going to just step beside all of these barbs. I'm not going to let them sink in. And now you become safe in an unsafe environment.
Mm-hmm.
We love those movies where, this this small statured individual walks into this dangerous setting totally confident because they know what they're capable of. They know this environment is not a threat to them. They can take out
Mm-hmm.
12 guys without even thinking. They are safe not because the environment is safe, but because they've learned to manage themselves in a way that keeps them safe. And marriage is the crucible that allows us to learn that, or not. We can stay the
Mm-hmm.
victim, or we can
Mm-hmm.
shift who we are and be safe in this environment.
Right, because
Within
that's
reason,
just
of course.
absolutely, and all of these are. I mean, I think we're talking about the bell curve here of the majority. There's always the exceptions on both ends of the equation here,
Right.
where
We never tell
there
somebody
are
to be. We don't encourage somebody to
right,
be immune to Ebola. We tell them, get away from
right,
it.
right,
And there are some clients that
right.
I think, no, you're Ebola.
Yes,
Your spouse
it's
just needs to
probably
run.
best to truly open your eyes and recognize what you're up against,
Right.
and take the steps accordingly, and then in time you'll figure it out. Is this the right move or
Right.
not? I mean, because that's that element of, again, if we can look through the lens at relationships of what's this exposing in me. This is one of my wife's big phrases
Right.
she uses, is what's being exposed in me here. What is
Perfect.
what is it that's the struggle that's mine in this? Is that I'm overreacting? Am I over demanding? Am I
Right.
too tired? Am I? And if she will do that work, man, it freaks me out because I know it's going to require me to have to really face things in me.
Exactly, because you can no longer hang it on her,
Yep.
because it doesn't work. I use timeouts a lot, as a breaking of the instinctive cycle, and I tell them the moment a timeout is called, go walk the dog, and what
Hmm.
needs to be in your mind is, what am I being selfish about? And
That's good.
because you're going to immediately go into how your spouse needs to be different and why they set you off. And the challenge is, if you're upset, it's because you're not getting something, you're demanding something that, and it may be good, but you're going about it the wrong way. It may be that what you're demanding isn't good, but do you even know what you're demanding right now? And it's that same thing. How do I put the focus on me in this moment?